So welcome everybody to the Academy for Addiction Professionals webinar. I changed the format a little bit this week into an interview guest speaker mode, and I actually think that that this is a much more effective platform and better information. And so, this week I'm very excited. I have Jaime Blaustein with us. Jaime is in the investment banking world, and he is about to throw his hat into behavioral health. But he's got a tremendous story to tell for his own recovery and things that he learned along the way. And so what I want to do tonight is get to know Jaime a little bit, so you guys get to know him. Have him give us our insight, his insights into what he's learned and what he's doing, and then talk about how he's taking all of his hope, strength, and experience and his knowledge, and what are the next steps? What is he up to, and what are we where are we going from here? So Jaime, welcome. There's going to be a lot of people that'll view this. I'm so excited because you're one of the few that survived, the wreckage of the disease of addiction, and very proud to talk to you. So go at it, have at it here. The audience is waiting.
Great. Yeah, Ben, thanks a lot for having me on this webinar. Greatly appreciate it. And maybe just start off talking a little bit about my experience and kind of where I'm at today.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, like you mentioned, I'm in recovery, coming up on 8 years clean and sober. And just by way of background, I'm from New Jersey originally, about 30 minutes outside the city. I was a really ambitious, a good kid growing up, really no issues to speak of. I was really good at collecting these accolades, which ultimately put me in a state of denial once my addiction rose to the surface, probably around age 17 or 18. But well-adjusted, a lot of friends, class president every year, prom king, right? All of these things that masked what the issue was, which was the fact that I was wired a certain way where when I put alcohol and drugs in my body, it affected me differently than it did other people. But again, I had enough going on where I didn't really see it as a problem because I could point to and justify with the circumstances of my life. I would say around 18, though, was where the unmanageability really started to pile up. I went to the University of Michigan for undergrad, and that's where I started to know a level of living that I didn't even know existed, to be honest. Rehabs, overdoses, psych ER admits, a lot of unmanageability in my relationships, but mostly internal unmanageability. The feeling of, in AA, we talk about the spiritual malady, but a doctor might call it depression, anxiety. All of that stuff really started a 6-year nightmare that culminated with me getting sober at age 24. And that set off a totally new life for me through the process of recovery. I got out of my 7th and final treatment center in January 2015. And I launched into action, and I did the work that we do in AA, which is the 12 steps. And my life has been catapulted to something that's completely unrecognizable when compared to my active addiction. And so since then, I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but I've been very blessed both internally and externally to get into a career that's fulfilling. But at this point in time, I'm looking to transition to something in the behavioral health space, and I'm beyond excited.
Oh, that's great. I wanted to jump on a few points that you made. So it really is unbelievable in a lot of ways that, at 18 years old, your disease, and I do believe in the disease model, your disease had already progressed significantly. And then fast forward to age 24, which in the scheme of things, is not a lot of time, 6 years, 7 rehabs, 6 years, and a whole bunch of other, consequences that, we don't need to get into. This evening, but could you talk a little bit about why it's a disease for you? What makes it a disease? I'm hearing from you that there was a very, very fast progression. If I could compare it to something, it's almost like somebody is diagnosed with cancer, and so there's all the different kinds of cancers, and some are much more aggressive than others. Some people have what's called stage 4 cancer before they even know that they were diagnosed with cancer, and the mortality rate is, a 99% chance of dying. And so I liken that to the disease of addiction and the progression. And, there are people out there, I don't have the stats in front of me, but there are people out there that, their life with drugs and alcohol starts at an early age, even earlier than yours. And some of them are still in active addiction well into the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. So I guess I have a couple of questions. One is, is it a disease? How do you know it is? And then are you going to stay sober? That's one of the fears, is that, the question comes up, am I ever going to drink or, drug again? And how the heck am I going to stay sober for the rest of my life? So I was just kind of thinking about that. The reason I asked these questions, and I'm sure that you've reviewed them, 100 times, in your own education, but there are folks out there that, they don't believe in the disease model, and that's fine. And they don't quite understand the progression and why somebody like yourself gets it at an early age at 24, and somebody who is 50 is still in the grips of the disaster that's their life. So if you could just jump on those points, that might be very,
Sure.
very insightful.
Sure. Yeah, no, that was a lot. So let me try to unpack that. So firstly, I don't love getting married to semantics and terminology, especially medical terminology that I don't have any qualifications to opine on. But what I will say is, how do you characterize a disease? It's progressive, it's chronic, it's fatal. And those three things characterize addiction. I kind of like to refer to it sometimes, just because I feel like this is a practical way to talk about addiction without ruffling any feathers with regard to the intellectual or the medical community. But I call it a condition, right? It's a condition. There's something within me, and what's driving this. I think we could talk about this all day, but there's definitely a genetic component. I think that's pretty characteristic of a lot of diseases. There's an environmental component, and there's something within me that responds differently when I put a substance in my body. And the truth is that this was not clearly explained to me until right before my 7th and final treatment center. And the way that I characterize the disease is threefold. One's physical. We call it a physical allergy, right? I start and I can't stop. And I don't know what's driving that, but I know that there is something different, and I have all of the empirical evidence to support that through my own experience and through the experience of those that I know who are in recovery. Now, I don't know if that's a gene. I don't know if that's a bundle of genes. I don't know if it's a chemical imbalance. I don't know if it's an enzyme thing. I've heard that theory before, the way that we process substances, but I know it to be true. I start and I lose the power of choice. And that's, by the way, that choice and that willpower is something that, with respect to other matters in my life, I've been able to apply very well, but not with this. This is a different animal. Number two, mental obsession, right? There's this peculiar mental twist that the addict suffers from. And that mental twist will come in the form of, as we've talked about, there's an obsessive compulsive factor here. There's a lot of delusion, right? A delusion that tells me I can do one drug, or I deserve it, or nobody will know, or whatever the case may be. And that's why somebody will get out of a treatment center 30 days, 60 days, 90 days sober, and they'll believe that they want to be sober, and they'll pick up. And it's like, well, what happened? You weren't physically dependent on anything at that point. There's a mental component to this as well. And then lastly, a spiritual malady. We call it spiritual malady in AA. A doctor might call it anxiety or depression. But there's something else going on with people like us where there's this void, and it's a feeling of disconnectedness. And that needs to be treated, because if I can treat that, then I don't need to worry about the mental obsession, because I'm not going to have to worry about needing to get out of myself. And I'm comfortable. And that's, recovery. A lot of the name of the game is, how do I get comfortable enough in my own skin where I don't want to get out of myself? And if I don't have to deal with the obsession, then I don't have to deal with the physical piece. So that's how I would characterize this disease. And I think there are a number of overlapping components to a lot of the other more conventional diseases that nobody really argues.
Sure. So one of the things that you said, which I think is just absolutely fascinating about this disease process, this condition, as you said, and I like the way you said that, is that in maybe all the other areas of your life, you have this ability to use your willpower and your drive, and this concept of being lit up, so to speak, as you've talked about in the past. And yet in this area, no go. It's just willpower is there is no power in, with that. You can't use it to defend, as you say, this allergy, this condition. But why is that? Like, why, if you're talking to John Q. Public right now, and mom and dad, and they usually will talk about their child's potential, and I'm sure you've heard that before, and he's such a good kid, and he's so smart, and in other areas of his life he's fantastic, and all this other stuff. If he would just stop using drugs, it would be okay. And like, I don't get it. So what is that for you? What exactly is that in your terms? I'm not asking you to be a medical professional here.
Sure.
I want to know what is that? What's the difference?
Yeah. I mean, that line of thinking was the dominant narrative in my household growing up, or, through my active addiction. Why can't he get this, right? Despite the fact that he knows he's an addict, despite the fact that he says he wants to be better, despite the fact that he's been able to apply willpower to all these other areas, why don't you just stop? And that is assuming a sane, rational perspective, right? But that's what characterizes this disease. It's not rational at all. And so self-knowledge and willpower are two things that I thought would get me sober at one point in time. But the truth is that something much deeper, something with more depth and weight needs to happen for somebody to have the necessary shift to be able to get clean. I sort of view as for many years, I would sort of work up these campaigns of willpower and say to myself, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get sober this time. And I really believed that. If you hooked me up to a lie detector test, I would pass. I really believed, towards the latter half of my active addiction, I'm done. And when I actually got clean and sober, it shifted from, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get sober, to, I can't do this. I can't get sober. Right? What's that all about? When I actually said that, that's when I got sober. So beyond willpower and self-knowledge, there's another component that needs to happen, and it's surrender. And the way that I view this is, I get surrendered. I don't necessarily surrender. I get surrendered. and it has to move from here to here. And that happens through a combination of being exposed to a solution, being exposed to recovery, and reaching that point where I've just hit a spiritual and emotional bottom, and I recognize that no matter what, I'm going to use. Not what you hear in some AA meetings, which is don't use no matter what, right? If I had the power of choice to don't use no matter what, then I wouldn't need to go to meetings. It had to go to, damn, no matter what, I'm going to pick up. And that's when I started to have that surrender. And that's when I started to have the open-mindedness and willingness to take the actions in recovery to ultimately have a shift in the way that I view the world.
So maybe you could talk a little bit further about this idea that, okay, you've got a lot of young folks out there, in their 20s and early 30s, and they're using, and maybe they're even an addict, and maybe they're even willing to give some lip service to the fact that they're an addict, but they're in their 20s and 30s, and to them, they've got, 30 to 40 more years of drug and alcohol research to do. Why should they stop? Why should they stop when, it's not a full problem yet. It's not reached its conclusion. I'm not like them. I'm not you, I'll be able to sort of navigate and manage through it.
Yeah. I mean, just like we talk about this disease as a progressive one, my willingness to accept A, that I'm an addict, and B, that this is the solution for me, and by this I mean recovery in the 12 steps, is also progressive. So let me give you a little window into my thinking in each of my 7 treatment centers, and you'll see that progression. So the first treatment center, I was 19, it was in Michigan, and I went in, and they said to me, you're never going to be able to drink or use successfully ever again. You have a disease. And I laughed and I said, you just met me. How do you know that? I just like to party. I'm good. The second rehab I went to, which was in New Jersey, I said, okay, maybe this is a disease. I see that these other people, there's something different about the way that they use and drink, but I don't have it. Third rehab was, okay, maybe it's a disease and maybe I have it, but I don't buy the solution that you're telling me. This 12-step thing, all of the things, elements of our wellness package. I don't believe that I need to do that to get better. I know this about myself now, and I do have a lot of willpower. So when I combine those two things, that will be the recipe for recovery. Fourth rehab, which was Destination Hope, I thought, okay, I'm the real deal. I'm an addict. I have this disease. And there's something to be said for this 12-step solution. But I'm just going to pick and choose what I think I need, and I will find the right formula. Okay. Fast forward a few more rehabs. Before the last one, I realized I am a bad addict and I need the whole pizza pie. I can't just take a few slices. I need a fellowship. I need a spiritual experience. I need to be of service to other people, to keep what I have. And that was really the difference for me at the end. It was a guy who ended up being my first sponsor said to me, if you don't do the work, you're not going to change. And if you don't change, you're not going to stay. And I believed him. And I realized that despite the fact that going into my final treatment center, I knew it was over. If I didn't have a shift in the way that I view the world, called a spiritual awakening, psychic shift, one part of the big book that I really love is it says thoughts, attitudes, and ideas were cast to one side and replaced with a whole other set of thoughts, attitudes, and ideas. That to me is a very practical definition of a spiritual awakening. I realized that if I didn't have that by going through the 12-step process, it didn't matter that I was done in my mind. What would happen is what always happened. I would start to feel okay. I would get a thought and I would be able to rationalize and justify it. And I would pick up off to the races.
Can you, could you say with a straight face that you'll never pick up again, that you're going to be sober for the rest of your life?
That's a loaded question. The reason is I respect this disease enough to know that if I stop doing the things that I do on a daily basis, and I'm very rigorous about my recovery. I sponsor a lot of guys. I'm very active. I do a 10 and 11 step every night. I'm very much involved in recovery. So long as I keep doing those things, which I have every intention of doing for the rest of my life, there's not an ounce of anything. There's not even a tiny thought in my mind that I could ever use successfully ever again, nor do I want to. And that's the miracle of this. I do not have a desire to pick up today, which is crazy, that I will not pick up so long as I do those things. However, I respect this disease enough to know that if I were to stop doing those things, what would happen is the steps would start to work in reverse, right? I would stop helping people. I would stop taking inventory at night. I would start to lose the connection with what I call God. I would start to create harms, 9th step. I would start to act out of my defects. I would start catching resentments towards other people. The idea of a spiritual connection would go out the window. And I would start to believe the lie that I could use again. And that's how it would happen. It would happen slowly over time. It would not happen tomorrow. Today, zero chance. I am nowhere near an arm's length away from a drink or a drug. I think anybody that says I'm 100% sure, the implication is that they don't respect the disease enough. But from where I sit today, I mean, between you and I'm not picking up ever again.
Right. I get it. No, I appreciate the honesty too. Let me ask it. Let me ask the question a little different. And it may get a little bit of a different response. So lay people out there would say, come on, the death of your mother, the death of your brother, cancer, why not have a drink? Why not get numb? What's the harm? Really you're gonna like plow through that stuff and not deal with it or whatever it is. Like, that's sort of like justified, right? Like no one would even bat an eye, or maybe even know. And if you did admit it, people would be like, yeah, of course he did. Like, yeah, so like, how do you respond to that when what I just did was normalize it for you? Sure. And, it doesn't need to be a Tuesday or a Thursday or a Friday for you to use. There's actually a definite reason that 99 out of 100 people would use, and not even, use something to change their mood. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I'm going to hone in on a word you used, which was normalized. I don't like to use that word, but a non-addict can do that. I totally understand that rationally. You want to numb out a little bit if something bad happens, you want to celebrate, like, totally fine. And there is no judgment there, right? If you are the real deal chronic addict, AKA you have the disease, you are unable to do that and then just stop, right? So I know, another implication in your question, which I know is not an actual question from you, but you're taking the perspective of somebody that might not fully get the disease,
right?
Is that you will do that for that, hour, whatever, however long, to numb out or whatever it may be. And then you'll just go back to the way that you were, or you'll stop. But with somebody who has a really powerful first step in recovery, they know it's not going to stop there. And in fact, I can't tell you when it's going to stop if I start again. So, and that's why, like, I viewed this process as like the end of the relapse is picking up, not the beginning, right? Something was fundamentally wrong with my recovery and my mindset prior to picking up, if I ever got to a place where that, and kind of what I alluded to earlier. But the real deal can't do that. And I know that, and I'm comfortable enough in sobriety where I don't even have a desire to.
Right. Got it. So let me switch gears a little bit. Let me talk about the rooms, AA and NA, and the 12 steps and everything. So let me just paint this picture for you, and then I want to get your insight into it. So Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, been around since the 30s and 40s and has gained momentum and is literally is international and has helped millions of lives. That's fact. All right, we've got that. So if I break it down a little bit further, and I'm a little cynical about it. Okay, so you're telling me that a room full of drug addicts and alcoholics are in a room. There's no drugs or alcohol. They're talking about corny subjects like God and, live in the day and, one day at a time and all these cliches. And they're talking about service and they're raising their hands and they're talking about, how pissed off they are at their dog or their wife is irritating them or whatever it is. And that keeps them sober. The other part of it is, to my understanding, and I just want to make sure that there's not any real rules. So for example, if I'm late to a meeting, now I might get, chastised by my friends in there or a sponsor, but you don't get kicked out just because you're late to a meeting. The one sort of rule, if you will, is a desire to stay sober, right? A desire not to drink and use. So how does that actually work? And how has it worked for you? If I'm looking at this from a different perspective, I'm going, are you kidding me? You've got a bunch of addicts who break the law, break the rules, find loopholes, and yet you're bringing them into a room with no rules, suggestions, no rules, just suggestions. We're talking about God and all this other sort of, stuff, touchy-feely stuff, and somehow it works. So could you enlighten the audience about that? Like, why does it work? And what's that about? Because from somebody who doesn't know anything, they're going to look at it and go, what the hell's going on here? Why don't you guys just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and not drink?
Yeah. In an odd way, it doesn't make sense to me. Right. But just like addiction doesn't make sense, right? From a rational perspective, addiction and why you would continue using, knowing the circumstances of your life and the consequences that lay ahead if you continue, just like that doesn't make sense. I don't fully get why the 12-step programs work. And that, frankly, is part of the mystery of it. I mean, there's God in that for me. But if I were to give you a more like intellectual answer, the main problem that the addict suffers from, I mean, there's many problems, but it's a feeling of separateness, a lack of connection to the world. And I like to describe the spiritual malady. When I talk to sponsees, this is the image that I come up with in my mind. It's, I am alone in a room, and every single person that I've ever met in different areas of my life, high school, college, etc., they're all having this amazing party, and they're having the best time ever, and they're talking about me and the fact that I'm not there and what a loser I am. And I'm in my room completely isolated, right? That is the natural state of somebody who's an addict, right? It's feeling disconnected, it's self-pity, it's selfishness, self-centeredness. And so naturally, the antidote to that is connection and selflessness. And so I think the 12-step programs provide a roadmap to getting connected. And so, the three elements of AA, you see the AA logo, it's a circle with a triangle in the middle, and the triangle has three parts, and that's the foundation of the program. And it's recovery. So the 12 steps, that's how we treat the mind. Fellowship, right? Going out to a diner after the meeting, right? The fellowship in recovery, treating the body.
Right.
And service. That's the third part, right? Helping others once you've had an experience. And so these things combine to form this antidote to what ails the addict and the alcoholic. And frankly, it is an amazing social movement. The fact that they've been able to keep this thing together, and the traditions, the 12 traditions, I think are not talked about enough. But that's what's enabled this to be around since the 30s, like you mentioned. And I think there was a Time magazine article. They ranked the most 20 or 50 influential people of the 20th century. Bill Wilson, I think, the founder of AA, was among the top for this reason. I mean, thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of miracles as a result of the structure of this organization.
I know, no, absolutely. So let me switch it up here a little bit, and also make a comment. It is so refreshing to hear the excitement in your voice about recovery. People, they want to dismiss the recovering community. They want to, summarize it, into, this weakness, lack of willpower. And just to hear all of the complexity of it and from you, and for you to be able to articulate it, it's going to be massively influential. So I really appreciate that. And I appreciate it even more as somebody who has spent a career in behavioral health, and seen it and done it all, and been on both sides of the fence. So yeah, that's really appreciated.
No problem, Ben. Let me just say, because it's important to me,
sure,
that it is very important that when I work with guys, we talk about being lit up in recovery, right? Like, a big shift for me when I got clean was viewing recovery as life as I know it, minus the only coping mechanism that I have, which is drugs and alcohol. And instead of that, life plus recovery. And so we do this, the people in my sponsee lineage and the people that I work with, we do this to be part of life, to get lit up, to be happy, to be joyous, to have success. I mean, the success starts internally, right? Like, I had that internal shift, that spiritual awakening, and then all of these external blessings fell in my lap. And while I recognize the internal is the primary shift, like, that's the most important thing, I also like external stuff too. And right, these are blessings of recovery. And I've had the opportunity to travel the world, to go back to business school, to just have like all of these amazing relationships advanced, not only restored through my recovery, but advanced beyond where they would have been had I not even been an addict in the first place. So, I'm all about that. This is not don't use no matter what, white knuckle it, hold the bottom of the chair and just don't do it just for today type of deal. This is let's have a shift, and let's get lit up and be part of life and live a life beyond our wildest dreams.
Fantastic. And so you've had a nice career, and again, done a lot in a short period of time. Tell us what you're about to do.
Yeah, so just backing up a little bit. So I got sober 2013. I lived in an Oxford house, 8 other guys in the house. I had a roommate, and like I said, I just dove headfirst into this 12-step process, and I had a shift where everything changed. Like, in between my years, everything changed. And on the heels of that awakening, or whatever you want to call it, I decided to move out of that Oxford house. I got my own apartment in Hoboken, New Jersey. I switched jobs to a firm called Lord Abbett, which it's a big asset manager, about 160 billion under management. And there I decided, I thought that I had underachieved a little bit in my career, and I had a lot of gaps in my track record through my addiction, through my, I had arrests, and the fifth and final time that I got arrested, I was in a bathroom stall in Penn Station with a needle in my arm, and I got arrested, and the cop, I came out of the stall, the cop pushed me up against the wall and he said, "You effing junkie." And he arrested me right there on the spot. And so I had all of these things that I felt like prevented me from getting to a point where I could apply to jobs that I was interested in and things like that. So eventually, once I cleaned up the wreckage of the past, I decided to apply to business school. And I applied to a bunch of schools, and I got honest about my story. And I had a lot of fear about this. I was worried that, with the stigma of addiction and all that comes with it, I wouldn't get admitted anywhere. And, it turns out the honest approach is always the best approach. And I ended up getting into a few schools and enrolled in Duke's business school. And so 2016 to 2018, I was an MBA student at Duke. I had an amazing 2 years. I got to travel the world. I got to make lifelong friendships and eventually transition into investment banking, where I've been for the last 3 years. So I'm at Credit Suisse, have been for the last 3 years, covering the industrial sector. So I do M&A, I do equity, so IPOs, secondary offerings. I do leverage finance, debt, bonds, things like that. And it's been an incredible learning experience where I've learned all there is to know about business, really. I mean, there's a lot more to be learned, of course, but the fundamentals of business, of finance, of operations, marketing, all of that stuff. It's just been a really fast trajectory and a great learning curve. However, I've been interested in something that is a bit more aligned with my purpose, and that's helping others. And so, I got a call from you, Ben, in January of this year, and you said, I'm looking to start a treatment center, behavioral health, mostly, or primarily, I should say, mental health focused, but substance abuse within that as well. And, do you want to be involved? And I didn't really know what you had in mind. I didn't know if that was, you wanted me to come speak once a year, or if you wanted me to, write a check, or I just didn't know. And, that's evolved into this amazing 5-month process of putting your experience together with my experience, living what we just talked about, along with my understanding of business and strategy and all of those things, and combining to form the Sylvia Brafman Mental Health Center, which is going to open its doors in about a month and a half. And so I'm going to be transitioning from my job on Wall Street to CEO of Sylvia Brafman. And I'm beyond excited to enter this space, to leverage all that I've learned in the last, 3-4 years. But more importantly, to leverage my almost 8 years of experience in recovery to form a world-class behavioral health facility that is going to help a lot of people.
Absolutely. No, that's very very exciting. I wanted to ask you a couple of other questions. One of them has to do with treatment, but the sort of the access to treatment. So there's millions of people right now in the United States that are addicted, that are suffering. Some have access to services, some that don't. Is there any difference between somebody in rural West Virginia and somebody like yourself as far as the disease of addiction goes? Is there any difference in them? Is there any approaches that should be taken that that are different? Should they be allowed the same opportunities that you or somebody else would? Like, how? Just what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I remember being in the intake room of an outpatient treatment center with my dad, who passed from this disease when he was 50. So this was a year or two before. And he said, I was early on in my active addiction. He said, you're going to go in there and you're going to see people with no teeth, with tattoos head to toe. And you're going to say to yourself, I'm not like them. And I just want you to know you're exactly like them. And that holds true today. I'm exactly the same as any addict and alcoholic at my core. I'm exactly the same as my dad. The difference is I've been lucky enough to have a solution that he wasn't able to have. And so, no, it's I like to say, but for the grace of God, there go I through no doing of my own, I've been able to be put in a position where I was surrounded with the right experiences and the right people to ultimately have access to treatment and discover a solution that enabled me to recover. The people that don't have access to treatment are no different than me. They're simply not as lucky. And so, yeah, I'm passionate about increasing access to the same exact solution that you and I benefited from to those that might not have the means.
Got it. And no, I like the way that you answered that. That certainly means a lot. You talked a lot about your recovery and the work that you did and sponsorship and the rooms and the 12 steps. How important was your family involvement in your recovery? And let me just preface it. So there's some rules of treatment where, let the addict be for a year, no family involvement, let them get their act together and then come back after that. Then there's the school of thought, well, go to Al-Anon, get your own stuff together, interact with the addict, but have boundaries, so there's that. Then, a third thing, again, there's several examples, but I'll just give three. Then there's the third one where, hey, listen, we're not going to change for you. You're the problem. We're not. And you have to adjust to us, not the other way around. So that's really it. So what was your family involvement? I mean, obviously you've shared about your dad who passed at an early age. And I believe you have a brother and your mom, and a stepdad. What was their involvement? Were they helpful? Were they hurtful? Did it depend on the timing of it? Like, how was that process for you?
Yeah, it's definitely a family disease, as they say. When the addict is sick, so is the family. And so it was very volatile. The relationship with my family was very volatile when I was in active addiction, but they were there to support me, to help me get into treatment centers and things like that. Naturally, there's a lot of resentment that builds up. And, just like I would say to my mom, you don't understand what it's like to be an addict. I also don't understand what it's like to be a family member of an addict, right? Like, I can imagine, that's why there's a whole program, Al-Anon, for people in that position, right? There's some overlap where you're powerless over somebody else, and there's this like combination of emotions, right? On one hand, you're angry at them. On the other hand, you love them. On the other hand, you're sad. On the other hand, you're resentful. And it's a challenging situation to be in. My family was there. And I'd say over time, they did a good job of disconnecting to some extent. And that's what they say to do in Al-Anon, right? So there were times where they said, if I got kicked out of a treatment center or something like that, you can't come home. But that is, my mom says to this day, one of the most difficult things she's ever had to do. So as far as my view on family involvement, I think it's critical. To whatever extent they are able and willing to be part of the addict's treatment. And that's going to be a big component of Sylvia Brafman, heavy family involvement. However, I will say that when the addict gets better, the family, to some extent, naturally gets a lot better too. There's still things to be worked out, but it is.
The reverse is true too, that if the family gets better and they work on their stuff, the addict gets better as well. Like there's sort of a symbiotic relationship there.
Yeah, I like to say that there are no conditions to my recovery, right? Like, it needs to come from within, but most definitely once in recovery, I would agree with that statement. Yeah, that if the family gets better, there's less poison in the air, there's less volatility, there's less negative energy. Right. And that's something that everybody can feel, and people heal together.
Right. Great. So we're gonna wind down. I wanted to just see if there was anything else that you would like to share, that, that we didn't touch on, and any message that, that you'd like to send? And the other thing that I would like to say is, is that I'd love for you to come back and specifically talk about the steps, the 12 steps. It's my belief that obviously they've helped, millions of people in recovery, but it's also my belief that, it's a tool to help people in their life, whether they're addicted or not, or they identify as an addict or not. And I was just hoping that you could come back and we could literally discuss the 12 steps and the value of them. Is that something that you'd want to be able to do?
Definitely. I mean, I'm a steps guy. Like that's what prompted this like revolutionary change in my life. And I totally agree. Everybody can deal with the 12, or everybody could benefit from the 12 steps. And that's why, in a treatment center, I think it was the first or second one, I would hear people say grateful addict, grateful alcoholic. And I couldn't wrap my mind around how you could be grateful, because I associated the disease with all of the wreckage and, the sickness.
Right.
And what I see today is, as a result of this disease, as a result of having this physical allergy, this mental obsession, I'm now in a position where I need to have this experience through the steps in order to get better. And as a result of getting better, I've now come out ahead, right? Better than I would have been had I never gone through the steps. So
right.
I think that the average person out there does suffer from some form of depression, anxiety, a spiritual void, and that they would greatly benefit from the steps, but they're not going to die. So there's less impetus to go through that process. And so, that is another mission that I have. It's to bring these principles into life for people that aren't necessarily addicts, because the world would be a better place if everybody had a 12-step program. So I'd be happy to come back and take a deep dive into each of the steps.
Great. And just as a little anecdote, it's my understanding that your little brother, who is not an addict, is actually participating in the 12 steps.
Yeah, I mentioned that to you.
Right.
That's crazy, right? He's 20 years old. He's a sophomore in college, not an addict, not an alcoholic, and he's been begging me to do the steps. And he hasn't, when I was 20 years old, Ben, I was getting kicked out of your treatment center.
Right.
So I actually hooked him up with my sponsee, and my sponsee is now taking him through the steps. So I think that's just a testament to what this thing does. Something was attractive about what it's done for me to him.
Right.
And now he's going through the process, and I've never taken a non-addict like formally through the steps. I try to sort of like embody those principles in all my interactions and convey them that way. But it's an interesting little case study, and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, it's
more power to him. That's fantastic. So Jaime, thank you so much for your time. We're gonna circle back and do this again. We're gonna focus on the 12 steps. I'm interested to see the feedback that we get. Really proud, really happy to have you. And listen, have a great weekend.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ben. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Jaime.